Welcome to the Music for the Soul podcast, where we talk honestly about difficult things. This is a place where music, hope, and healing come together. I'm Becky Nordquist.
And I'm Steve Seiler. Thanks so much for joining us. We're very excited today to have with us Mindy Peterson. And I guess I'm just going to go ahead right away and attach your name to the Enhance Life with Music podcast, because that's how I met you. I was excited to find you because obviously I'm somebody who believes that music can heal, that music brings joy, that music can do all these wonderful things. It can transform lives, save lives, encourage, bless, all this stuff. And just when I saw the name of your podcast, I thought, yes, somebody else, one of my people.
Yes.
Somebody who gets it. I don't have to explain it to her. Right?
Right.
So tell me how you arrived at this idea of a podcast that enhances life through music and a variety of different types of music.
Sure. Well, I guess it was meeting of a whole bunch of interests of mine. Definitely music has been a passion throughout my life. It's something I've been involved in since I was a little kid. Business is something that I have a degree in and worked in, and having this podcast is a little bit of a way to have my own business in a sense. And music advocacy is something that's always been near and dear to my heart. I taught piano lessons for decades, and at some point when podcasts became a thing and I became introduced to them, I was immediately hooked. Mm-hmm. And I would say around this time, I had been teaching for a number of years and found myself really intrigued every time I saw articles in the news, which happened regularly, articles in the news about the latest study on music helping with healing of Parkinson's, or music helping with healing Gabby Giffords from her shooting, and she relearned how to speak using music therapy, or studies about the effects of music training on a developing child's brain. And all of these ways, these just very different ways that music holistically impacts us and enhances our lives, whether we consider ourselves a musician or not. You know, there's so many ways that music affects us. And we don't need to be a professional musician to take advantage of that. So every time I saw these articles in the news, it just fascinated me and really grabbed my attention. Then you kind of juxtapose that over the fact that podcasts had become popular. I was hooked. I'm listening to these podcasts thinking this would be the perfect medium to just spotlight all the ways that music enhances our lives, whether it's going to a baseball game and having organ music playing and how that enhances your experience, or something like the fact that music is the last memory to fade away in someone with dementia.
You're touching on two really personal things right now. You know that my father is in the late stages of Alzheimer's, and he's pretty much gone for conversation. You're not going to have any meaningful conversation with him. But if I put on music from the 40s, I can just pull up to stream it and just type in 1940s.
Yeah.
He closes his eyes, smiles, and sings every word to song after song after song after song. And I just see the joy on his face. And it's a lifeline at this point. It's a lifeline.
And I imagine you feel like he's recapturing some semblance of quality of life in those moments.
Right.
And you have your dad back in some capacity in those moments.
Yeah, you know, he and my mom, when I was a kid, when we would go on car rides, they would sing in the front seat. And of course, when you're a kid, you think that's corny. But I look back now and they would sing song after song after song and harmonize. And it was just such a joyous time. It's just a joyous memory. You know, it was a joyous time. They were so happy. And so when I hear him singing those songs from their youth, I picture him remembering my mom, who's been gone for about 9 years. So it's a deep joy. The first time I experienced that, I had a gentleman at our church in Los Angeles. This is, going back almost 40 years. And he was in his 90s, but he had a ministry to the nursing home. He would go and do a service at the nursing home every Wednesday. And our church organist would go and play for him. And my first really striking memory from that was there was an opera singer who was in that population, and she was gone. I mean, they'd wheel her into the room, and she would sit with her head down and her eyes closed and motionless. And the minute I started playing the hymns, she lit up like Christmas morning and sang along with every single word at the top of her lungs.
Wow.
When I finished, she'd turn off again.
Mm.
So, I mean, like you said, that you don't forget that kind of stuff once you see it. So it's power.
Right. Yes. So I guess answering your question to how I got started doing this is I was listening to a podcast one evening as I was working out. And one thing I like about podcasts is it just gets the wheels of your brain going. Music does this too. I mean, you could be listening to music and it just enhances that ability to just process things and think about things. And even if it's something just percolating in the back burner of your brain and you're not really consciously thinking about it. Well, that was sort of happening with me as I was listening to some podcasts. I don't even remember which one. It was about it wasn't even about music, but was thinking, man, this would be a perfect medium to spotlight all these amazing capabilities that music has. There's got to be one out there. So from there, I went on this search to find this podcast that I couldn't find. So I think during another workout session of listening to some other podcast, suddenly thought, hey, I should start one.
Why not you, right?
Yes. And my kids were at an age where they were kind of just old enough and independent enough that I was finding I had a little bit more leeway with my time and just had the bandwidth to sink my teeth into something like that. So it was good timing too.
Mm-hmm. I love how your podcasts, it's varied. Like there's different topics. Like one, I'm a homeschooler. So like the one about the westward expansion, that's something that we're starting to study. And I'm just like, this is so great because I can hand it off to my other homeschool moms and we get a whole aspect with fine arts, but also the historical context, which I thought was brilliant,
Yes.
So
well, thanks for passing that along and thanks for the feedback too. That's great to hear.
That's good stuff. Just from a completely other-sided viewpoint or perspective on what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's just how it really does affect everything in our lives, from the most painful things to just our everyday moments, right? And I've really enjoyed that about what you do. So,
thanks. Great to hear.
The phrase that you use that really stands out for me is the advocacy phrase. Mm. And I wonder if you'd say more about what that means to you and what you mean by it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say there are a couple different facets to it for me. One facet is I really do believe that music enhances lives. And so advocating for music and spreading the word, I feel like education and advocacy are kind of two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. But advocating for music, educating people about the value that music brings to our shared human journey and the potential that it has for healing and for other enrichments in life is sort of a public service opportunity because I do believe so wholeheartedly in the value of music and its healing properties. So that's one side of it, is I really do believe that spreading that word to our communities is helping our communities. Mm-hmm. The other facet of music advocacy is I am a music educator. I'm a musician, and I feel our biggest job security is advocating for music and educating others, educating our communities on the value that music brings. There's this thing called the curse of knowledge that Chip and Dan Heath have popularized in their books, but it's been a concept that dates back to probably the 70s. But it's this idea that if I know something, I just assume other people know that too. Right. And that's probably one reason you get people talking in acronyms all the time. And you're like, wait, you're in education, like public school education. I'm not. You're going to have to spell out these acronyms for me. Or you're a surgeon. I'm not, But that curse of knowledge, we just assume other people know what we do. As musicians, we just assume people get it in terms of the value of music and how it has this holistic power to heal and enhance lives. And people don't get it. And why should they? I mean, if they're not in that industry or that field, they don't. So that second facet is, I guess, less altruistic. It's kind of like this job security. It's our best job security to let people know and educate them on what music, the value that it has for our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, and I think what's really fascinating about it is I think most people, if they would think about it, would know inherently the value of music. And it's like, why have we been teaching kids the ABCs with a song for eons?
Sure.
It's like we already know this, right?
Sure.
Advertisers sing to us about beer and toilet bowl cleanser. Why do they do that, right? Because we're going to remember it. So if we're educating our kids, we want them to remember stuff, right? They're much likelier to remember things they hear in music than things that they're told or read, according to the brain science.
Right.
So fascinating. Well, I want to talk about how you found us, because you found us through Becky.
Yes, I did. And I found Becky through my cousin Carrie Ellis. Shout out to her. She, bless her heart, right from the start of my podcast was a huge cheerleader and was telling people about the podcast. And she's just that kind of a person. She will be anyone who is a dear friend of hers, she will be their biggest cheerleader and whatever they're doing. So that's Carrie, but she listened to the first couple episodes. And at some point early on, she texted me and said, Mindy, I just met this woman. You've got to contact her and learn more about this organization. Her name's Becky Nordquist. Carrie sent me the link to Becky's song before we said hello. And Carrie and her husband have an incredible story of sadness when it comes to family, children, child loss. They've had miscarriages. They had a child who was diagnosed in the womb with encephalitis. So the baby was not expected to live. Carrie and her husband were encouraged to have an abortion. They are people of faith and just felt that was not in congruence with their faith and their beliefs about creation of life, and carried the baby full term. Gave birth. The baby lived for several days. And so they just have quite a story of how they have really walked the walk when it comes to their beliefs and their faith, and how that faith has really carried them through some dark times. So it was, I'm not sure where in the process of all of those happenings.
Before We Said Hello came out in 2019. So
okay.
That gives you some context for how long ago it was.
Definitely. It must have been after this baby was born and lived a short amount of time that Carrie and Becky connected then.
I am so glad that we did connect through all of that. It's painful stuff is just difficult, but I'm grateful for the fact that it does do things like connect people with a common cause to encourage other people and bring awareness and education, like you said, and advocate for those who are hurting or walking through life. Life is just hard, right?
Yes, it is.
So I'm really, I remember praying for Carrie and her family, and her name is etched on me for some reason. And so when you said your cousin's name, like, oh yes, and I'm not really sure of all the details, but I do remember Carrie and her being in my heart a lot.
Yeah, she's a memorable person.
So
why don't we take a listen to a few seconds of Before We Said Hello, the song that connected you guys.
We prepared a place for you inside our hearts. Oh, how you were wanted. We had plans and dreams. Then in an instant, it all came apart. Like a flower that was crushed
For me, every time I listen to that song, those miscarriages were a hard part of my story. And it's not often talked about the relatives and people that are in your inner circle, how loss affects them. So how would you say, as someone in that circle, but not directly involved with that loss, how would you say that affected you going through that loss?
Well, I would say I was pretty insulated from it, just from the sense that I live in Minneapolis. She's in Michigan. We get to see each other once a year, and we always pick up right where we left off.
Love
But
that.
I wasn't right in the thick of it, the way her sisters were, the way her brother, her parents, the people who were right there. She fortunately does have a lot of family living right by her. They're in West Michigan, and so they would be a much better people to ask that question to. For me, it was more, I grew up with Carrie. She's my cousin, but she's like a sister to me in a lot of ways. And so my heart just broke for her.
Mm-hmm.
So that was mostly the way it affected me, is just kind of grieving alongside with her. My heart just broke for her and her husband, Will, and they were on my heart and in my prayers just constantly for a long period of time.
We've been talking about education, and I feel like one of the things a song like Before We Said Hello can do is help people who haven't walked the journey themselves understand someone else's pain. It's so easy to see something like that from a distance, go, oh, that's really sad. And then carry on with your life and expect people to bounce back. Like, well, what? That was several months ago. Are you still, you still having a problem with that? That sort of thing. Becky and I have talked about that. This is a child. This is a family member, and it always will be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a song like Before We Said Hello, that I actually learned in the writing of it, having heard a testimony that caused me to take up the writing of the song. I was writing somebody else's story, but at the same time, I was learning about what that feels like. And I think that if music can do that, it can create that humanity connection, right?
Absolutely. And actually, as you're talking about that, it's reminding me of the thing that was most impactful to me about my interview of you, Steve, way back a couple of years ago when you were on my podcast. And that is where you're talking about learning for the first time about the connection between music and lyrics and how they impact the two different parts of the brain, with music impacting the same part of the brain that grief and trauma reside in.
Yes.
And so and you were talking about how that's one reason that music is so powerful in helping people process trauma, process grief, is because they may have heard the words that are used in the lyrics from friends and family. They may have read them down through the years, but you had people telling you, I've heard these words over and over, but it didn't really connect with me until I heard them set to music, because of the way that melody impacts that part of the brain where trauma is processed. So as you're talking about Carrie's situation and the song, I do remember hearing that song for the first time when Carrie introduced me to Becky's work and Music for the Soul, listening to that song and just feeling like I had some of those emotions that Carrie probably experienced. Even though I've been blessed that I have 2 healthy kids, no miscarriages, I haven't directly experienced child loss at this point in time. And yet listening to that song allowed me to sort of enter into that grief a little bit more than just hearing about it and thinking that breaks my heart and I feel so bad for Carrie. The song does allow you to enter into that specific grief a little bit more.
That makes sense. That makes so much sense. To almost have an engaging empathy, I think is what the word I'm looking for. Whereas, I remember before, because I had my first 4, I never had any losses. And so I'd hear about a miscarriage or stillbirth, be like, oh, I'm so sorry. But there's a different level if you can enter into that place either through music or through sometimes life experience. In my case, where the words don't fall on you the same. When you hear of someone going through that road, and then to have something that you can offer to bring comfort and put words to somebody's ache, as we've heard over and over again through the power of music and healing, it's it's such a gift to us as humans to have music, and so important because we all of our lives have a soundtrack, right? I mean,
Yes.
in a moment, it takes us right back to a time in our lives, both beautiful and painful sometimes. But
Yeah. Well,
it's
and I could see that song being really helpful for someone like Carrie who has experienced that loss to share with others just as a way of this is what I'm feeling and this is
Mhm.
what I'm experiencing. Kind of like there's another interview that I had, Creative Vets, which they're also out of Nashville. I'm not sure if you're
Mhm.
familiar with them, Steve,
Yes.
but they were talking about the work that they do with veterans who are returning from active duty, military duty, often with PTS. And a lot of times they don't want to talk about their specific experiences, but if they can allude to what happened within the container of song lyrics,
Mhm.
it gives them this container to share their experience with friends and family members who have said, we could never get them to share their
Right.
experience or what happened. This song is the only way we've been able to enter into that and experience a little bit of what their experience was.
Yes, we've recently added a song called Anonymous Man to our catalog that I co-wrote with a veteran based on his PTSD experience after returning from serving. So you're right. It opens up the door of understanding for us as people who are walking with others. Music is it's a superpower,
Yeah.
is what it is. And I'm so glad that you have the podcast to help people understand all these different
Mhm.
ways that it can serve. I'd be really curious to know if there are a couple of songs that have been extra powerful in your life.
I wouldn't say there's one that's just popping into my mind specifically right now. It's more sort of like categories, kind of like these milestone songs that
Mhm.
have been important or have been
Your
listened
soundtrack.
to on repeat. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Songs that have been listened to on repeat during impactful chapters of life, whether it was when
Mhm.
I met my husband and we were dating and falling in love and getting married, or the first time I moved away from home and moved from Michigan to Chicago and just all the newness of that. That was when I had my first job out of college, and there's so many things happening. And there's certain songs I listen to now that it just takes me right back to that
Mhm.
time. Songs that I listen to for sure over the holidays. I mean, any kind of holiday music,
Mhm.
Christmas songs. For me, I
Mhm.
have always loved Christmas. And
Mhm.
so just hearing any Christmas song immediately puts me in this festive, just magical frame of mind. So
Mhm.
I would say more those types of landmark milestone songs that I sort of point to and was like, oh yeah, that takes me back to when my kids were young. Lori
Mhm.
Berkner's music. I interviewed her on the podcast at one point too. I'm
Ah.
like, thank you so much. You helped keep me sane during those early childhood years.
Music in that way, it's kind of like time travel.
Yes.
I really think that because you're right. You can just be driving down the street and the song comes on the radio. It's like, okay, I'm in high school.
Yes. Yes.
It is,
Yeah.
decades ago, boom, there, and you're right there.
It
Yeah.
So,
Well,
evokes
that
an
was,
emotion, right? It evokes
yeah,
emotion that can't be, driven out in any other way, really.
right. It's sort of reminiscent of the olfactory sense in that way where you get a whiff, you
Yes.
smell something and it
mhm.
can
Very much
just
so.
take you back. Like, I don't know what that was, but it was something that reminded me of a smell from when I was a little kid,
Right,
Yep.
right. My
Yeah.
kids used to talk about the way that their grandma's house smelled, my
Mhm.
mom's house. So
Sure.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I want to give people a way to contact you and learn about what you're doing. So if you want to visit Mindy's website, it is mpetersonmusic.com/podcast. If you're interested in learning about Enhanced Life with Music, of course, it's available on all podcast platforms. She's on Facebook at Enhanced Life Music, Instagram, Enhanced Life Music. Twitter is at Music Enhances. So that one's a little different.
Right.
And your email is Mindy at mpetersonmusic.com. So I hope that if people are interested in advocacy of music or education of music, they will reach out to you. And definitely you guys should check out her podcast because you're going to learn
Absolutely.
something interesting.
Mhm. It's a great
you.
podcast. I highly recommend.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mindy. It was great having you today and just chatting it up and talking about what we all love, which is music and the impact on our lives. And we're just glad you could join us today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for the honor of having me on, and so excited about the work that you guys are doing, and really excited for this opportunity to reconnect after first connecting with Becky and Steve back, 2.5 years ago, probably now.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed the discussion today, please share it with a friend and give us a positive review on iTunes.
Please visit our website, musicforthesoul.org, where you can stream or download every song in our catalog, read our lyrics, our healing music guide, and our blog posts, and much more. And we'll be playing before we said hello at the conclusion of this sign-off. So thank you for listening, and God bless.
We were so excited with anticipation. We prepared a place for you inside our hearts. Oh, how you were wanted. We had plans and dreams. Then in an instant, it all came apart. Like a flower that was crushed before it could bloom. Like a story just begun that ended much too soon. We grieve love interrupted that has no place to go. We said goodbye before we said hello. They say you're in heaven, and someday I'll see you. But that doesn't fill the ache I'm feeling now. Your life was so special, such a miracle. Now life goes on, but I just don't know how. Like a flower that was crushed before it could bloom. Like a story just begun that ended much too soon. We grieve the child who's living in our hearts, but not our home. We said goodbye before we said hello. You are my angel, and we'll never be apart. I may not hold you in my arms, but I still hold you in my heart. Like a flower that was crushed before it could bloom. Like a story just begun that ended much too soon. We grieve the hopes cut short, the memories we'll never know. Why? Tell me why. Why did we have to say goodbye before we said hello?